Guten Tag. Wie geht's? All right. Good morning, and man, Alex grabs it right off the rip. So much for a Democrat whistleblower protection. And I'm still working on fixing the article audio deal, so you'll just have to forgive me on that one. Sorry, I won't have time to do it this morning. Hopefully I can find time this evening. So, yeah, and Alex, I apologize, brother. I did not catch y'all's show last night. I just didn't make it that late. So I don't know if you covered this yet or not. But it's, boy, are they talking about it on Twitter. So I'm just going to go straight with this MSN article, and let's talk about this situation. I hope the audio is adequate. I know that that the microphone switches when I switch over. And I forgot to turn the fan off. There we go. So, U.S. says missing GOP whistleblower is an arms trafficker and Chinese agent. Now, let me say this real quick. It's been made pretty clear that there are a couple of whistleblowers right now who have left the country who were U.S. federal agents and federal employees who are blowing the whistle on Biden family corruption stuff and have left the country because of the absolutely imminent threats to their lives, right? You've all seen the memes where you've got somebody who's obviously been murdered and the caption says, what did he know about Hillary Clinton? That looks like it's getting ready to be applied more and more to the Biden family as well. The evidence that we're seeing so far seems to suggest that the Biden family is as corrupt, but not as competent at corruption as the Clinton family. And that... Let's be real clear on something here. That's quite a statement in and of itself, because the fact of the matter is, despite Biden's obvious corruption and incompetence, I mean, Biden has been a controversial figure and on the wrong side of every issue for his entire career, and has been in politics, elected over and over and over again for half a century. And somehow, despite him being obviously and deeply corrupt, he keeps hanging around. It's galling to me, honestly, on a few different levels that Biden hasn't been impeached yet. Right? The two big levels on which it galls me that he hasn't been impeached. The first and most obvious is there is ample evidence of substantial corruption up to and including Biden himself. Remember holy shit, he didn't get the $1 billion. I mean, that's a direct personal confession of the commission of a serious crime on camera before substantial witnesses. And the crime entails elements of active treason. Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution is pretty clear on this. You have the act, you have the number of witnesses satisfied, and there is a penalty defined. Right? Treason is the only crime that is explicitly defined by the Constitution. Right? Every other violation of the Constitution falls under 242, violation of civil liberties under color of law in one way or another. Functionally, outside of that, the law is entirely its own body, governed by the Constitution insofar as the Constitution explicitly forbids the usurpation of individual specific rights. And even those amid the nebulous penumbra of unenumerated rights as referenced by Roe v. Wade, from which they artificially enumerated a nebulous right from that penumbra. Even thereunder, the only crime that is defined by the Constitution itself is that crime of which Joe Biden has explicitly expressed a confession of commission. Now, we've got these whistleblowers, more than one, hiding out outside the U.S. in fear for their lives. So I'm going to read some of this article to you, and then we're going to get to how this should color your understanding and the coverage and the information surrounding Donald Trump and his several indictments. So, U.S. says missing GOP whistleblower is arms trafficker, Chinese agent. This language by itself, GOP whistleblower, is an indictment of the entire article. A whistleblower is not immediately a political entity. Believe it or not, it's possible for a whistleblower within the party of the criminal to blow the whistle on the criminal. Right? I'll be very generous for a moment, and I'll extend the assumption for the sake of argument that there exist Democrats who are not also criminals. That's extremely, extremely generous. Especially if we're speaking primarily about the political class and not the Democrat voter at large. Now, the fact of the matter is that in order to be a Democrat, in order to vote Democrat, you must first have the internal compulsion to crime. Because at the core of your belief system exists the primary assertion that it is morally preferable to take by force from someone who has what it is that you are envious of. Right? To vote Democrat is to, at the minimum, begin to flirt with the moral distinction that your want trumps just property right. But if I'm being very generous, and we assume that not all Democrats are inherently criminals, then one can say that to be a whistleblower is not in and of itself particularly a partisan position. So the inclusion of the qualifier GOP whistleblower at the beginning of this article is in and of itself an indictment of the entire veracity and verisimilitude of the following statement. It says the Justice Department on Monday unsealed charges against the co-director of a Maryland think tank, alleging he acted as an illegal arms broker and unregistered agent for the Beijing government while also seeking to help China obtain Iranian oil in violation of U.S. sanctions. Gal Luft, he's a Chinese spy, a dual U.S. and Israeli citizen, is accused of recruiting and paying a former high-ranking U.S. government official and advisor to then-President-elect Donald Trump on behalf of principals based in China in 2016 without registering in the U.S. as a foreign agent as federal law requires. Yes, Trump did business in China. Unlike the Bidens, Trump did open, above board, filed his taxes, no shit business, bought real estate and built towers in China. Believe it or not, you can do business around the world. And when you look at places like China, India, places where you have a first world government in a third world country, we're told that, there's these horrible, evil things called sweatshops where they make your iPhones for $2 a year. Da, 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 da. Okay, let me clarify something real quick. There are places where, yes, a menial, intolerably low wage is earned for doing menial labor. For wages that an American citizen would never consider accepting, for work that they might do if the wages were commensurate with their expectations. And there's a reason that an American would not consider accepting those wages. It's not just because we have these absurd minimum wage laws in this country, which you want to get inflation back under control. There's the first place to start. As soon as you shut off the printing press. But in those places where people like Donald Trump and Apple even, in these places where there are sweatshops, the thing that you need to understand is their alternative is not nothing. It is starvation. Their alternative is not mere lack. It is the annihilating nothingness of abysmal descent into poverty-generated death. When your choice is between dying slowly of starvation and thirst, or make $1 a day for work that should pay more, you have to start turning your ratchet somewhere. So the 57-year-old fugitive now has become a key figure in Republican-led corruption investigations into President Joe Biden. Let's not forget, the first thing Donald Trump was impeached for was attempting to investigate the obvious corruption of the Biden family. And it is not as if there was thin evidence. Now, part of the impeachment was based on the assertion, of course, at the time, that what Trump was doing was attacking one of his key political rivals. And let's remember the facts here. At the time Trump approached Zelensky about investigating Biden's clearly and personally confessed crimes against the United States, Biden was not only not officially entered into the primary for the 2020 election, he had explicitly stated that he would not run. That changed later is utterly immaterial to the facts of the case of the impeachment of Donald Trump. utterly immaterial. The fact remains that Biden was not then a candidate and had explicitly decried any possibility of entering into that position. That changed later does not change the facts of the case. Fast forward to today. Not only is Trump facing multiple indictments currently, but there have been several more indictments prepared and lined up, many of which have had statements issued in relation. The one in Atlanta, for example, hey, we need a little more time. We had intended to file this already. We've hit an unspecified delay, and we expect to be filing at a later date. No, you didn't hit an unspecified delay. Somebody else got their indictment in front of the court first, and you're waiting for it to be obviously overturned for being completely unfounded and unreasonable, so that you can bring your next indictment in, because the obvious point here, remember, Biden had not declared and had said he would not run. Donald Trump declared his run for the U.S. presidency in 2024 earlier in the cycle than any candidate in history. No one has ever declared their candidacy so far in advance as did Donald Trump when he declared at the end of last year. So there's no doubt at all that Trump is the current primary front-running opponent of the interested party in the case of all of these indictments, which have all been filed by aggressively partisan Democrat sycophants. Right? This is all related to and resultant from the amorphous warfare, fifth generational communications-based amorphous warfare that we've spoken about in the past. For those of you that are hip to the generations of warfare, amorphous is what comes after asymmetrical. They are not the same thing. Asymmetrical, the attack can come from any direction. Amorphous is you're walking through a pleasant street you're walking through New York City when all of a sudden you realize that you're in the Matrix and everyone's an agent. Whether they knew it or not, they get converted involuntarily by the message. So, Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, surprise, surprise, said Luft engaged in multiple serious criminal schemes. He subverted foreign agent registration laws in the United States to seek to promote Chinese policies by acting through a former high-ranking U.S. government official. He acted as a broker in deals for dangerous weapons and Iranian oil. He told multiple lies about his crimes to law enforcement. As the charges unsealed today reflect, our office will continue to work vigorously with our law enforcement partners to detect and hold accountable those who superstitiously attempt to perpetrate malign foreign influence campaigns here in the United States. Our law enforcement partners to detect and hold accountable those who superstitiously attempt to perpetrate malign foreign influence campaigns here in the United States. What about the Bidens? Here's your whataboutism. What about the Bidens? It is awfully convenient. Like I've just described, Donald Trump is facing several indictments that are politically convenient to Joe Biden. Years have passed since the occurrence of the individual activities that Trump is accused of having committed crimes in relation to, with no indictment. Now, that might sound like the normal course of justice if it weren't for the fact that he is he's the apparent nominee right now. By the polls, right now, Donald Trump is crushing the GOP primary, and it hasn't even started. In contrast, You want to talk about a politician being in trouble politically with the electorate. Joe Biden is not the guaranteed frontrunner in the Democrat primary going into the 2024 election. I want you to think about what I just said right now. He would be in serious trouble as a politician, as the incumbent, even if he were the most obvious front runner in the primary, because the fact is he's an incumbent that's being primaried. I don't think that's completely unprecedented, but it's almost unheard of for the incumbent to be primaried by his own party in the presidency. Now, it happens in lower offices all the time. The incumbent is often primaried, especially in so-called nonpartisan elections in local jurisdictions, etc. But for the incumbent president to face primary challenges going into an election season is almost unheard of. I cannot think of it happening off the top of my head. I'm sure it must have happened once. I'll have to look that up. I didn't even think to look that up until I started talking about it just now. But I'd be surprised if anybody watching now were able to just pull one off the top of their head and say, oh yeah, remember there was this one back in 1950 something. Pitt Danny points out, Dems stole it from Bernie last time. They'll have to steal it from RFK Jr. Yeah. The idea that elections can't be stolen. Ask Bernie. I mean, Bernie was literally run out of a Democrat primary by active anti-Semitism within the Democrat Party. We have the emails to prove that. That's a thing that happened. Yeah, Warren's a little different story, but yes, Danny, you're not wrong there. So when you look at the fact that there's an indictment, the fact that this dual citizen U.S. Israeli is being accused of being a Chinese spy. I mean, how far do we have to get down the rabbit hole before the boy that cried wolf gets ignored? Right? I want to take you back in the Wayback Machine for a moment and remind you about McCarthyism. We hear a lot about McCarthyism, and especially when a Republican says, hey, there's a problem here. Like, for example, Swalwell slept with a Chinese spy and still didn't get thrown off of the House Intelligence. Seriously? Swalwell was a Chinese spy. Even if an involuntary one. Even if he didn't know he was doing it, Swalwell conducted espionage for China. After we knew that for a fact, I don't care if it was involuntary. If you got beat by a spy, and I'm not saying that, I'm sure there's a spy out there that could beat me at the game. Sure. I'm sure there's a spy out there that's smart enough to trick me into involuntarily committing espionage, and I just haven't met him yet. And if I were to meet that spy and involuntarily commit espionage without my knowledge, and then it came out that that's what happened, that should be the end of me. That should be the end of me as a functional entity that in whom is vested a high degree of trust in the handling of U.S. national security. I'm not saying it should be the end of Swalwell, as in he should be executed for his crimes. But it should absolutely be the last time. The moment we heard about Fang Fang should have been the last time that Swalwell was allowed to breathe within smelling distance of a skiff, let alone still hold a position on the House Intelligence Committee. Because once you're compromised, that's it. You're compromised. Right? You don't get uncompromised. Spooks are like waterbeds. As soon as you poke a hole in it, you've got to clean up the mess and bring in a new one. That's it. You don't rehabilitate a compromised spook. It's not an option. Swalwell wasn't even a spook until he got spooked by the Chinese. Feinstein, same thing. 20 years with a Chinese spy as her personal driver. That means for 20 years, she was providing actionable, credible intelligence to a Chinese agent. We actually have a word for that in the business, right? You know what we call these people? These are assets. That's what an asset is. An asset is a foreign asset placed in a useful position, right? I find a bomb maker in Afghanistan, and I convince him that in exchange for his life and possibly freedom, I want to know who his supplier is and who his recipients are, right? I find a bomb maker. He's getting material from a bad guy somewhere, and I want that guy. I want to get him. I'm going to put him under the jail. And he's got mules whose job it is to place bombs in particular places. I want to know who they are. I want to know how he contacts and communicates with them. He's my asset, right? He has a boss that tells him where he wants bombs placed. I want that guy. Right? I did this for 7 years. I've got a bad guy. That's an asset. And you better believe I know where he sleeps. I know where he takes his tea. I know where he meets his tea boy. I know where he buys his sheep. I know where he keeps his wives. And please believe I'll come knocking on that door because I want to know who's giving him his orders, who's supplying his materials, where his materials are being supplied out to. And please believe, if I've got an asset that I find is flipping his coat and giving actionable intelligence to that boss, that supplier, those mules that might come back on me, that's an asset that's about to get burned. That's an asset that needs to go away. Now, if the boss and the supplier and the mules learn that I know that my asset has been flipped, and now I'm going to have to burn that asset, well, they're either going to have to stash him away to protect him, or they're going to have to burn him themselves. Because now he's compromised. There's no more paying him for information. There's no more bribing him for information. No. From there it gets dark. From there it gets very, very dark. Under the jail dark. That's what your Swalwells, Feinsteins. I'd be surprised if you could find a Democrat that didn't fit that category. I would not be surprised if you could find several Republicans that also fall into that category, but I'd be more surprised if you could prove to me that there were Democrats that didn't. The one exception I might give you is Princess Hawaiian Punch, Tulsi Gabbard. I'll give you a maybe on Tulsi. And honestly, I'll give you a pretty positive leans toward the trust angle maybe on Tulsi. But Danny says, didn't Fillmore not get run again by his party? He didn't get primaried, but it was the same effect. It happened a few times back then. Yeah, and see, I'm not sure if I'd go so far as to draw a significant distinction between just not getting run again and... No, there is a distinction there because the candidate's not running without the support of the party. But that the support of the party is split between the candidate and his primary challengers is an incredibly damning indictment of the expectation of the party that he even has a chance at winning in a primary, which, let's be real. Joe Biden has not and never will legitimately win an election for the presidency of the United States of America. 81 million votes plus 79 million votes is more voters than there are. So I'm going to have to put a pin in it right there because I got to be in Lithonia in like 20 minutes. So I love you guys. Thanks for watching, and we will see you tomorrow. Hey, come on, I talked about the fucking whistleblower. I covered it. You be safe, though. I'll see you soon, sweetheart.